Okay, so part B of the peripheral nervous system is really going to discuss not just the spinal nerves now, we're going to discuss the cranial nerves. That's really what I want to focus on here, right? The cranial nerves. So again, what we talked about in part A was really dedicated towards the spinal nerves, which is a type of nerve, but we're going to discuss then the other types of nerves in the body. In the PNS, we call cranial nerves, right? There are 12 pairs of cranial nerves, right? And those are located mainly in the face area, but we'll see that there's going to be other places where the cranial nerves located near the face that then undergo the sensory and motor responses, right? But these are directly connected to the brain. That's the difference between the spinal nerves and the cranial nerves. The spinal nerves are connected to the spinal cord. The cranial nerves are connected directly to the brain, right? Two are attached to the forebrain, and the rest actually feed into the brain stem. So that's two parts of the brain, right? Most of them are mixed nerves. What do we mean by that? That they undergo sensory and motor. That's what we call mixed, right? They have both of those, right? But two then are purely sensory, and we'll look at those in this PowerPoint, right? Each of the 12 have a Roman numeral to it. And the reason why we have, for example, the olfactory nerve labeled as number 1 and on and on and on is because they're numbered based on where you see them first, rostrally versus caudally, which means when you look at the underside of the brain, where they're located starting from the very top to the bottom. That's why we identify them as the 1 through 12. And that's why that name is just for number 1, olfactory is number 1, on and on. So there's a couple of mnemonics that they show you there to memorize each of the names of the cranial nerves there. And mnemonics are good to understand, to look at lists like this and to memorize names of there. These are olfactory bulbs, right? Little pads, if you will. Okay. Okay. Go to the primary olfactory cortex, and that is in the cerebral cortex, right? And again, they're pure sensory. Okay. I put these tables in there in the figure in there as well to show you, again, these are all in your book, so just to show you what we mean by nasal mucosa. And if you see this is the side view of the nose. So just to kind of show you some anatomical stuff, because we haven't, AMP2 is all about respiratory and digestive, so we see this more in more detail, but you can see this up top. You see that bone there is called the hard palate. Right there. It's the top, the roof of the mouth. Here's a tooth, right? Just to show you there what that is, right? Here's, in fact, your lip, right? There's the good piece of fat and tissue there. Lying right over your lip is the opening to the nose, right? And as air passes through and chemicals pass through, we go through these three places, right? And if you look at these little deviations, they're little kind of valleys, if you will, forming these tunnels. And lying on top of these little kind of curvatures in the nose, which is deep in the nose, right? We've got all of these, those are your filaments, right? Those are your olfactory receptors right there. As chemicals land on the receptor, let's say these dots represent chemicals, and the receptor, that chemical stimulation, or the receptor, the stimulus sends a graded potential and then an action potential up the nerve to hit the olfactory bulb, which is that pad that was sitting right over there. This is the ethmoid bone, by the way. This is the ethmoid bone there, right? So there's little foramen, little holes where those nerves go through and then end up right at the olfactory bulb. And then there's other neurons that send that signal even further in, right? So talking about first and second order, this would be a first order neurons, those right there. Second order would probably be the olfactory bulb. Third order would be the ones that are sending to wherever in the cerebral cortex, that primary olfactory center in the cerebral cortex. So this does a good job of showing you where it starts, where the course is, how it runs through, where the function is. Clinical testing, that's what we're going to do today. Just kind of, you can sniff stuff and, you know, to test your cranial nerve. And then sometimes what happens when that doesn't function and why that might be the case, right? Some examples of that. Okay, so that's our first one. Again, it goes on and on. So here's our second one. Here's optic, number 2. This comes from the retinas, right? They go in part of the brain called the optic chiasma. Those tracks go to the thalamus, and then they run to the visual cortex in the back of the brain, and these are also sensory, right? Again, that's what I want you to pull from this for those questions, right, in the exam, where you find those, right? There's the origin, clinical testing, homeostatic imbalance to help you understand. So I'll just, visible light goes through here, through the lens, hits the back of the eye, and we'll go again, we'll dissect an eye so we can see the back of the eye, where the retinas are located. The retinas perceive information, visible light. So this is light stimulation or receptors. And then those signals carry across, right? So the retinas are the first order neurons. The second order are these tracks that cross. We call this the chiasma, or the cross, or the X. So they cross this way, right? And here are the cell bodies. We call this the nucleus, and that's where the cell bodies are located, right, of those neurons. And then the third order neurons send the signal to that part of the brain, right? And again, where we're at, the occipital area, that's where the visual cortex in the back of the head. Okay? So this area of the nucleus is where the thalamus is, by the way. So the thalamus is also a relay station. So it's sending the signals back to the back of the brain. And that's where you see that signal's being sent for vision. So it continues to go through all. That's what I want from the. So those go all the way to 12 here, right? This is cranial nerve 10, by the way. It's called the vagus nerve. And you can see that the vagus nerve is really important because it actually is part of the autonomic response. So that signal goes to all of these things here, which is not actually face, right? All the other stuff. So it actually forms this really special sensory and motor responses to all of these really special places. That's the vagus nerve. And when the vagus nerve gets damaged, we can see loss of functioning from here, right? It's a really important one. So it comes from this part of the brain. And that's the brainstem, by the way. That's where that's, you know, coming from. That's the medulla oblongata. It's regulating all of these automatic responses. rate of breathing, rate of heart rate, digestive function, chemical balancing, kidneys, liver, detoxification, all that stuff. So some of them are super important. Other ones are pretty isolated. Depends on which one is which. Okay. So I think you can read some on your own or pull that information I'm asking for those from that information.